the way. 3 cups of really warm water. I can hold my finger in it without burning. That's about right for the yeast. So I'm going to put in the equivalent of 2 packages of yeast. Now, a package of yeast is 2 1/4 teaspoons. And 1 packet will generally raise 1 loaf of bread. So I'm putting in 4 1/2 teaspoons because I'm making 2 loaves of bread. I never heat up my oven for less than 2 loaves. Okay, so there we go. It just kind of sits on the surface of the water. If you want to agitate it just slightly. There you go. You're just breaking the surface tension on the water. Here's a big glob over here. I'm going to break it up. Let me get a knife. This has kind of formed a bubble. I'm just going to break it apart. There we go. That's all I'm going to do. I'm going to let that sit there for about 10 minutes and start to get happy. And then I'll show you what I do after that. The yeast I use is not this. This is just an old yeast jar I have. I buy yeast in bulk, and so I put enough in here that'll last me, a month or so, and keep this in my fridge, and then keep the remainder of it in the freezer. Okay? So that's it. The water, I used water that's been filtered. You don't have to. And it's warm enough that when I put my finger in, I'll say, that's pretty warm. But I can leave it. I can leave it in there, but it still is maybe just slightly uncomfortable. It's very warm. You don't want to have boiling water. You'll kill your yeast. So I'm going to let that sit for about 10 minutes, and then I'll come back. All right, I'm back. My yeast is smelling yeasty, and at this point what I do is I go to my whole wheat flour bucket, which is really big. I grind about this much at a time, and I'm going to put a cup in. I'm only using a measurement here for you because I'm not sure. I just do it, so let me see if that's about right. Nah, I'll put another half cup in. It's about 1.5 cups of flour. And I'm going to stir that into the yeast water. That's all that's in there right now. It's real sloshy, and that's okay. Just going to give the yeast a little something to feed on. People think it has to be sugar. Any carb will do. And flour is carb. So I'm going to let that sit for about another 10 minutes. And when we come back, it should look a little foamy. I'll be back in a minute. All right, I'm back. And you can see that my yeast water and my wheat flour are bubbly and frothy. And if you watch it, you can even see it bubble a little bit. If I just shake it a little. Yeah, it's perfectly frothy. Okay, what I'm going to do at this point is add my liquid ingredients. Let me get a spoon out here. Alright, what I've gotten here is some melted butter and some honey. You don't have to use butter. You can use oil. It works just fine. When I'm feeling cheap, I use oil. I'm going to add one more liquid to it, but I need to talk to you about it for just a minute. I see lots of people buying fancy dough conditioners, and they're expensive, and there's just really no need. There's some things you can use as dough conditioners. Vinegar is one of them. Now, how much vinegar do you use? And you can use it in any bread recipe. You use as much vinegar as you did yeast. So if I used 4 1/2 teaspoons of yeast, I use about 4 1/2 teaspoons of vinegar. So I'm going to put that in with my liquid. I'm going to stir it together. No, it does not make your bread taste vinegary. You can't taste it in the least. Okay, that's all mixed together. I'm trying to do this one-handed because my camera crew is fishing. I'm going to let that drip just a minute since I don't have but one hand. Okay, and I'm just going to stir that in. Just mix around a little bit. Oh, that looks lovely. Oh, it's so frothy. And I use both white flour and wheat flour in my bread because my family likes it best. I figure if I'm getting some whole wheat in them, I'm happy. So You know, sometimes I use half and half. Sometimes I use a little more wheat. I am going to put just a tiny bit more wheat in this. Okay. Good. And I'll tell you all about how to do this. Don't worry about it because I'll have the instructions below. Here's my other conditioner right here. Powdered milk. I put about a tablespoon per loaf. I'm making 2 loaves, so that's about 2 tablespoons of powdered flour. It helps to make your bread soft. Even if it's wheat bread, it'll make it soft and delicious. Here's some other things I'm going to add right now. This is wheat germ. This is wheat bran. You don't have to have the wheat bran, or you don't have to have either one. You can just use all flour. I'm just telling you this is how I make it and this is how I like it. So wheat germ, wheat bran, a couple of 3 tablespoons of brown sugar, and my salt. That's all going in right now. Okay? Sorry, I don't mean to make you dizzy, but I'm trying to get this done with one hand. Stir that in. I like to put those in when it's still kind of, the mixture is still kind of wet, because I like to rehydrate that wheat germ and the wheat bran. If you wanted to use some oat flour in here, you could as well. Just remember there's no gluten in it, so you need to add a little more yeast, or give the yeast a little longer time to rise. You know, I find most people are in such a hurry. You know, yeast will work, even a little bit of yeast. I mean, if I just put a tablespoon of yeast in this whole thing, it would rise the whole thing, but it would take many, many hours. So it's just however long you want to wait. Okay, now I'm going to turn the camera off, and I'm going to add a little white flour here, and it's going to get stiffer, so I need both hands. You're watching a how to make wheat bread video, but when I uploaded this video, for some reason, I guess I must have not pressed the record button good enough, and the kneading portion where I showed you how to knead is not there. So this is several days later. I've mixed up another kind of dough. This is actually an oatmeal wheat bread recipe, and I'm going to show you how to knead and insert it into the wheat video recipe. I knead on my flat top counter because my tile cabinet tops are tile, and I don't want to pick up any bacteria or germs out of the grout. So I just clean this glass top cook surface very well, and that's what I knead on. You also want to be sure, if you spray perfume on and you put it on your arm right here, you want to be sure to have washed that off, because sometimes that'll get on your bread, and that's undesirable. So here we go. This dough is already pretty dry, so I'm not going to be incorporating much of that flour. And how I knead is I turn the dough over and over on itself and push with the palms of my hands. This dough is a fairly stiff dough, so it's quite a workout. That's my stove squeaking as I press each time. And so you just keep turning it over and over on itself. Sometimes I put one hand on top of the other hand to push, and you just keep going for 6 or 7 minutes until it's all kneaded. I know when it's done because by 6 or 7 minutes of this I'm out of breath. It's a workout. And you just keep, see, this bread isn't really sticky at all, so I don't need any of this flour I put out here because I'm able to pick it up. Once I get through kneading it, I will put it in my bowl that has been lightly greased and cover it with a damp tea towel. You want to be sure that all your ingredients are incorporated, but more than that, you're developing the gluten, and that's what gives you a wonderful texture to your bread. So, we'll get on and pick up with the wheat bread video. I just wanted to be sure that you could see how to knead if you've never done that. To me, you can knead in a mixer, or you can knead this way, and I use both depending on what I feel like it. But if I want to feel, I don't know how to describe it, there is a certain pleasure I find in hand kneading dough and by making it all by hand, and I think you may find that too. People who have bread machines don't usually say that. They say they like the bread machine doing the work for them, but I like the part of getting my hands in the dough and making it all from scratch. You can decide what's best for you. Okay, here we go. My dough is kneaded. It's just fine. I put a little oil in the bottom of my bowl. I'm going to grease it just slightly. I'm going to take my dough up off my surface. I'm going to put it face down so it gets coated with the dough. Then I'm going to turn it over. Be sure all of the edges are pressed down like this. So it's a nice ball right there. Let me rinse my hands to get the oil off, and I'll show you what I do. All right. I take a nice clean tea towel that's been dampened and wrung out, and then I simply cover my bowl with it. I leave it here sitting on the surface so nobody comes and messes with my surface, because I don't clean it between now and when I turn it out to shape it to go in the dough pans. And that way everybody knows bread's rising, don't mess with my surface. So I'm going to let it rise here at least an hour. If it's a cool day, sometimes it takes an hour and a half. And I'll be back to you when it's ready. Here's my dough. It's risen to more than double. I've pressed it with my fingers. The dough does not spring back up to fill in those holes. I know it's risen all it's going to. So here's what I do. Most people get aggressive and, treat their dough badly and press down the center. I don't do that. I just turn it over. Excuse me, Cripper, right? She's home from fishing, so she can help me. And it's nice and spongy and lovely. Here's what I do. I just kind of divide it in half. I just eyeball it. I never get it exactly even, because one loaf is always bigger than the other. But I get close. Sometimes I kind of lift them up to feel. Okay, they're about the same. So here's what I do. I just press them out, sort of like this, in a rectangle, and I just start rolling and pressing, and I roll the ends in. Okay, if they start pooching out, just keep rolling. If you see any big air bubbles, you want to get those out, but usually I don't have too many. So you don't have to beat it down and be all mean like that. Do bread abuse, right, Prepare?
Bread abuse.
There you go. That's one loaf. How hard is that? Okay, here we go. Here's loaf number 2. Press it down, kind of in a rectangle. Press out any big air pockets you see. You can see all the goodness in there. I can see the wheat bran, the wheat germ. It's going to be lovely. You're just rolling it up tight. This is definitely going to be the bigger loaf, which is okay, because we leave the bigger one out and put the smaller one in the freezer is usually how it works. Then I'm just kind of rocking it back and forth to get it real tight, because when you cut it, you don't want to have any holes. There's a little bubble. Okay, here we go. And then we put it in the pan like this. Boom. Cover it with that same towel. Let it rise another hour. Okay? I'll show you when it's risen. These are not quite as risen as much as I like, but it's late and I'm tired. And so when they could rise a little more, but I'm ready to go, what I do is I go ahead and turn on my oven, 350, and put them in the oven cold. And then as the oven warms, they rise up and they're good to go. Okay, 350, they're in. I'll show you when they come out. All right, they're done. They're out of the oven. 2 really nice loaves of wheat bread. If you want to check if they're done, really, because you want the bottom and the sides to be brown, if you've oiled your pans really well, then you'd be able to hold your pan with a pot holder and tip the bread out to see if the bottom has browned. If it's not, just put it back in the oven, let it go a little more. Sometimes your loaves will begin to get really brown before the bread's actually done. If that happens, you can lightly cover, just setting it on top, a piece of foil or a piece of parchment to keep the tops from getting so brown, and that works really well. I hope you try this bread. It is not just okay wheat bread, it is really good wheat bread. It's not hard to do. You might want to review the video a couple of times, you know, how I'm putting it together, but this is a really good recipe. You can leave out the wheat bran. I don't recommend leaving out the wheat germ, really, but you can leave out the wheat bran if you want, and you know you've got it right if you start with the right amount of water and the right amount of yeast, and then put in enough flour to where you can still knead it, but that it's no longer really very sticky. You're going to be fine. Give it a try. Let me know how it comes out. Cat's Cradle.